I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zias Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Welcome to Ask Linda and Mark GM Quandaries, where we answer your GM quandaries, starting with Numbat's quandary.
Numbat has two quandaries, so let's start with the first.
First quandary.
My biggest quandary as a GM is how to find enough time for preparation to the level I want.
Now, preparation is one of the biggest, just like very generic, but omnipresent quandaries for any GM. And I remember that when you were first starting out, that was also like one of the biggest deals for you as a GM. So
yeah, for sure.
I can answer the question for me, but it's not going to answer as well.
Yeah,
so
I'm more of a typical GM, so yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. I would say that for me, you can't necessarily just add more time that's available. So it's more about finding ways to make the time that you have more efficient. I find that organization and assistive tools is very important. So I like to look for resources that make things faster. So I use a lot of things like spreadsheets or taking notes onto the scenario of things that I know that I'm going to need to do. I tend to prioritize the things that I know that I'm going to have the hardest time figuring out on the fly. So I think it's about knowing your GM style and knowing what things you're going to want to have looked up in advance, and what things you are going to feel comfortable improvising. So having a source of things like if you're running something homebrew, having a source of a list of names, for example, and a list of stat blocks and other resources that you can pull from quickly whenever the PCs do something that goes off the rails. Having some spare maps as well. So whether that is Paizo flip mats or some maps that you found online that you can plop down whenever something like that comes up. Having those kinds of tools on hand, I find to be very useful. And also, I think that there's a tendency sometimes to worry about like, oh, if I'm not perfectly prepared, are the players still gonna have a good time? Or are they gonna be saying, oh, I'm kind of fumbling? But really, people are going to have a great time at your table, and GMing is going to have a lot of adapting regardless. So you're never going to be able to be fully prepared for everything that the PCs throw at you. I mean, that's just the truth, that they're gonna run down some rabbit hole that you never wanted them or never expected them to do. So yeah, having resources. Danny Bing is saying that the NPC list is super useful with quick blurbs on accents and attitudes. Yeah, having a toolkit that you can pull from. It is useful. And I would say for if you're running a published adventure, that if you don't have as much time as you might want to prepare everything, try to prepare the structure so that you know where to go when different things happen. So if you know that, okay, yeah, this encounter is going to lead into one of these encounters, this encounter is going to lead into one of these encounters, the structure and sort of the motivations and tactics of the major NPCs, so that you know where to jump to whenever something happens. And beyond that, generally breaking up prep and over the course of different days can be useful too. So if you want to prep something and break something into chunks that make sense for you, like you could prepare, say, okay, today I don't have enough time to prepare the whole adventure, but I'm going to make myself a little chart with the structure of the adventure. And today I'm going to prepare the creatures and make sure I'm familiar with how their abilities work. And it's totally cool to have that be farther in advance, and then just do a quick review before you run the adventure.
Mm-hmm. And it's also important to consider that a lot of the feeling of being overwhelmed and just always needing more time to prepare, even no matter how much time you have, part of it is there is some level to which you just have to prepare certain adventures, especially if they have a subsystem. But part of it is also sort of internal, like the feeling of I need to prepare more every time that unit that I spend preparing is going to make it increasingly better. And the best way to handle that is just eventually to be sort of forced to run with enough prep to get those tough bits down, but like not as much as you would want. And then one of those days, your players are gonna be like, "This is the best time you've ever done," or something like that. And it can be very validating to be like, "Well, wait a minute, but I didn't have as much prep time," because, like Linda was saying, one of the key blockers is the idea, oh, nobody's gonna have fun unless I put this much amount of prep into it.
In fact, certainly there's actually such a thing as preparing too much for a session, because then if you block yourself in so much with, okay, you know, these are the 3 ways I can anticipate the PC's going, and then they go off the rails, then it can feel more distressing during the session, as opposed to thinking of things as here are the building blocks and the pieces that I have at my disposal, and I can pull those in whenever I need them.
So the second question is how to find the balance between running and playing. I think it may be useful to clarify, is this in ye old hypothetical or not so hypothetical situation that many GMs run into, where other people in the group don't really want to GM, so you wind up GMing pretty much all the time by default unless you sort of solicit more GMing? Or is it just in general, when you have, say, availability to all the online org play resources, and so there are games to play in, but you're looking to find balance between GMing and playing,
or is this about like
with available GMs?
Because everyone's sense of balance everyone's sense of balance is going to be different on that. But in general, though, if you feel like you are, I don't know if you really have a situation where people are playing too much and they're like, please, will you let me GM? Like, you don't really hear that. You hear about the person who's always GMing and wants to play. I would say that in that case, looking for opportunities to give other players a chance to GM and to support them in building their confidence in doing that, with short self-contained things like for example bounties in Pathfinder Society or quests in Starfinder, to give them something that they can try out, and really, I think that's something that's worth checking in with yourself on how you're feeling about how much you're GMing versus how much you're playing, if you really want to try something out. But generally, one shots are a good way to get GMs in to trying something out, and providing support to those folks. But like Mark said, I'm not sure exactly if that addresses your question. So.
Yeah, that's for new GMs, but it might be a separate question of
like,
if you have GMs around, but you're trying to find that balance.
And you're trying to find that balance. I would say that from sort of whether it's organized play or not, figure out how much you want to GM and sign up to GM that often. And that's kind of the easiest way to communicate, hey, this is how much that I want to GM. I would like to GM once every other week. And so I'm going to sign up to GM once every other week, and then you can talk to the other folks who GM about like what you're excited about playing.
On the flip side, if your default is you're playing a certain amount of the time and you want to GM some of the time, just to rotate and to give a GM that other people can play, you could consider the fact that, let's say, if you're playing on online and there's all sorts of games going on, if you're playing and there are 4 to 6 players, then if you GM every 4 to 6 times, then you're providing a GM at the same rate that you're playing. Now, some people just play, so you might want to GM a little bit more than that. If you're doing it just based on thinking, how can I do a rotation where I'm mostly playing?
Oh, Wither has a thought for like stuck on the GM road. If you build a homebrew brood world and you want to play it as a player, how could you go about maybe getting in the PCC? That's a great question. So,
yeah, let's go to that before we switch
yeah.
to another question.
So, I would say again, looking for sort of those self-contained opportunities and giving the other players the feeling that they have license to do something with an area of your campaign. So pick something in your campaign. Say there's like a city or a town or a country or something like that that you can tell the players, this is not part of my overarching plot. If you do stuff that's here, it's not going to cause any issues with the story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so because I think that's the big thing with someone playing in someone else's world. They might be worried, hey, you know, am I going to do something that's going to mess with the overarching plot? So you're like, okay, you know, it's like, please don't use any NPCs from this organization, and it's like, hey, you know, do something. You can do something in any of these cities that doesn't use this, or hey, you know, you can introduce a new city that's in this country that does like sort of whatever you want. Here's just the general ideas about this country. So you give them flexibility to build something of their own.
Our GM Tools collaboration episode is another way to even have this seeded ahead of time. Because we had multiple options for ways that the players could collaborate more than usual, one of which was they could be co-conspirators for helping to build certain parts of the campaign world. So if you have one player who's built this one particular city in your campaign world, maybe they'll run a game in that city that they really know. So if you've had the players participating in building the world from the beginning using that player collaboration tools, then it'll be easier for them if they're in a homebrew, in your homebrew setting, to your shared homebrew setting, to run a game.
And in some ways, I think that this is something that comes up for us that we have to practice as Paizo employees who work on particularly when working on adventures, is that we have these Golarian books. This is a shared campaign setting in a shared world. So we can sort of check with the other people who are building this. Hey, did you have a plan to do something with this particular hook? No? Okay, great. I'm going to run with it. So you can even do that if you're a player who's looking to get in on some of that GMing, say, hey, you know, I noticed that this was sort of an open hook. Is this something you're planning on working on, or is this something I can run with?
Yep, I know Linda and I had a rotating GM one-on-one Fate game where we each listed certain characters that we were probably going to use in our plots, and we decided that we were going to have like seasons of it where one person was doing the meta plot and the other person was doing sort of one-off sprinkled in, and then switch. Yeah. So you can do that, for instance.
And for that we had each of us had one character that would always be ours, whether we were the player or the GM. And then there was a third character that was very much of a I'm gonna stick my nose in everything and get in all the trouble character, and that one always fell to whoever was the player at the time.
Yep. And also my character didn't always come when I was GMing.
That's
so there's a lot of different ways and techniques you can use to make that work, but it's all about collaborating between all the different players, including
But I think the generalized thing on that is that you can have NPCs or characters who change hands in order to help to drive the story.
Absolutely. So the next question, going back to Ular's question, is what's the best way to restore player agency when you, as a GM, cross a line? Realizing that this is a case-by-case issue, do we have some good examples we're willing to discuss? So we have, so this is a situation where the GM has crossed the line into removing player agency and wants to restore player agency.
So the players feel like they don't have enough choices, or that they're being
railroaded. Jinx.
Yes. So it's hard for me to think of like a very specific example as opposed to just knowing that this is something that I've experienced experience with players saying particularly earlier on in my GM experience. It's like, well, I feel it's like, oh, I feel stuck in this. I would say that acknowledging the railroad,
especially if it's a published adventure,
yeah.
you sort of have the excuse somewhat, especially if you're an
Mm-hmm.
inexperienced GM and you don't want to like really go off the published adventure
Mm-hmm.
and have to make stuff yourself, of like saying, you know what you just said as a third option is a pretty interesting idea, but I'm not really prepared to go past the scope of the adventure, and the adventure author didn't think of that. So it'd be easiest if you would be okay with going with one of these two ideas that are in there. And see what, just if you just like actually break the fourth wall and talk to the player about it. If you're in a published adventure, that might be a way to go about it. And then that way you've still left it as an option, and you've explained that you don't really have a good way to continue because you're running off a published adventure, and you're still letting them make the choice. And they might still say, nope, sorry, I'm doing this third thing. But by phrasing it like that in terms of a choice, it gives them the agency, even though you're sort of lightly pressuring them to pick one of the other two things.
There's also players noticing and being bothered by sort of the obvious false choice, the fork in the road where everything leads back to the same point no matter what they do. So like, let's say that you
like the Glass River Rescue
Yeah.
is a very good example of that, where there is a, if I remember correctly,
You can
there's
choose one
there's
way or the other to
there's
go
a
on
Callistocrat who's like,
Yeah.
we need to be careful because we're in Rasmuran, and there's dwarves who are like, oh, just do whatever, and if you just do whatever, nobody finds you anyway until eventually you get caught in a particular place. If you do the Callistocrat's more careful plan, that works, and then people find you in the same place anyway. So it turns out that the precautions that you take are irrelevant because exactly the same thing happens either way.
I would say then the sort of the question is, when you realize that people are upset there, is it a big enough issue that it's worth retconning something about the story? And is it straightforward enough to retcon something about the story? Or is that something maybe that you could have an impact on sort of the next scene? So maybe the PCs are maybe the PCs say have found the secret base of their enemy that they've been pursuing for a while, but their enemy was still like super prepared for them, even though they did everything that they could to sneak up on those opponents. And the PCs might be frustrated by a situation like that. This is something that happened in a game that Mark and I were playing once, where we had super snuck up on a group in the middle of the night, and yet they all like were there and had their armor and their weapons at the ready, and were like ready to stab us immediately. And so that was kind of a frustrating experience as players, because we felt like we didn't really have like our player agency. Like, it didn't really matter how we had decided to do this. This place was going to be like that all along. So I would say that
we had sneaked up, and it was 3 a.m. and within one round of sneaking into the place, which the GM later told us a spider saw us and telepathically communicated with an Ettercap, who communicated with all the sleeping people who set this up in one round. They all had their weapons and armor and were standing to block us from a back door that we were coming into, so that they were in a formation.
Yeah, but there's other ways that you could go about this to make the fact that to make the fact that the enemies were prepared into a plot point. So let's say that you had something like this happen, and the players were like, "Hey, what?" It could be like, "Hey, why were they so prepared?" And this could then give the PCs a chance, because you're going to need some time to prepare and think about this between sessions. But maybe then the PCs have a reason to suspect that someone's been spying on them, so their enemies were informed. And then you've got like a sequence of some skill checks in some way, or a mole. and then that gives them a sense that, hey, there's probably a mole, and then you have a plot about uncovering the mole, and then there's a sense of, oh, well, we only found out there was a mole because they were prepared beyond what they were supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So you can, in some cases, bring the story back around to explain, oh, well, this was weird, but this is why, and now you figured this out. So I would say that trying to find ways to either retcon if you have to, and people are unsatisfied with things, or to come up with an explanation in the story that allows the PC's preparation to have meant something.
Right. All right, let's see. The next conundrum we have is from Atom Generator. Usually my biggest problem when I GM Homebrew World is I always find myself in a rabbit hole of world building, but can't find a way to implement that world building. So a piece of advice that stuck with me from a very early dungeon magazine that I had read is, like, I think it's either the 0th or the first rule of Dungeon Craft from there, which was try your best to not create more than you actually need. So if you're in a rabbit hole of world building and you don't have a time or capability of implementing it, think about what are the PCs going to run into, or what is going to become relevant to the PCs soon, or they're going to be capable of learning or finding out, and then implement that. So instead of implementing lots of details about a town that's halfway across the world, the ones that are closer to where the PCs are might be a more useful place to go. And then that way, because I could definitely get stuck in rabbit holes as well, which is like, oh wow, there's all this stuff that I could implement now. You're implementing, you're iterating. It's kind of like the same principle as lazy evaluation in computer programming, where you don't want to evaluate if you have a statement that's like, if the sky is blue, or this complicated thing that's hard to evaluate, then something happens. Well, the sky is blue, so you don't have to care about the other thing.
And I would say if you're, but people may be feeling inspired to build out other areas of the setting, aren't specifically where the PCs are. So I would say that a skeletons and Legos approach is probably a good way to go about this. So the skeleton being sort of the overarching structure of the big characteristics, and the Legos being like, you could have a town. So instead of being like building out in full detail, this is a town that the PCs are not going to go to because it's far on the other side of the world, and it has this problem with this recurring haunting that's going through the streets at night, and and then here's exactly how that recurring haunting ties into the very specifics of the culture in that place. You could have the town that has a ghost that runs through the streets at night as a Lego that you can then plop in to wherever the PCs are going, so that you can still do that building with a little more genericized, and then put a coat of paint on it to slot it in.
That's right. And even if you're somewhere that's close to where the PCs are, it's possible that you can still get into a rabbit hole that's more detailed than what the PCs will actually see. And of course, if you're really inspired, then you're probably not in the situation of you can't find a way to implement it all because your brain is running on overdrive and you implement that piece. But when you're going beyond that, that's where you should try to shape the contours based on what you're going to need soon.
So Legos works both for general NPC ideas, for locations, for plot hooks, all those kinds of things.
All right, let's see.
What do we got next?
So that's when we went and we did Wither King's follow-up to the other questions. So got some...
thoughts on finding a middle ground when a GM is really invested in a subsystem and some of the players find it really boring. Sure. I would say that if you've got some kind of subsystem or mechanic that some players are, the GM and some players are interested in too, and not others, that's a great time to take that and bring that to be something that's offline, that's handled via either emails or like a little side session that's just for that, so that the players who aren't invested in it can focus on what they enjoy.
And then you can focus on the results for those other players. So for instance, if you're doing some kind of really complicated like kingdom building stuff, and it takes a while with you and that one player who wants to do the kingdom building, but then you come back and say, okay, well, Katie the kingdom builder just spent a while, and now you guys have this arena and waterfront, and you all gain like 1,000 gold pieces from tariffs.
Yeah. And then this new arena that was built is a place where a little encounter happens, or there's some kind of event that happens in the new arena because that's now a thing.
But that way, like, people feel happy that Katie, the kingdom builder, is doing the kingdom building thing because they just got 1,000 gold pieces, and Katie's happy because she did kingdom building, and they're happy because they didn't have to do the kingdom building.
And because she chose to build the arena, now there's this cool arena plot.
So it makes people get invested in the fact of, and like be happy and be like, hey, thanks for doing that. We got 1,000 gold pieces and an arena thing. So that's probably the best way to handle it. If you don't have the capacity or capability to do it offline, then you're going to have to compromise and possibly just do a lighter version of the subsystem so that the other players don't have like big portions of the session where they're going to stare off.
Look for ways to streamline that experience and be like, okay, so now you're going to roll for economy, loyalty, and stability. Who's going to roll for? It's like this person always rolls for. Pick someone who always does each of the pieces, and then have them quickly do those pieces, or have that be something that you do over a kind of break in the session where there's something else going on. So like if you have a time during the session where everyone's kind of pausing to eat dinner or something else like that, do that over that portion with some of the players so that the people who aren't invested can still, eat and chat and do other things.
Let's see.
This is talking about what we talked about before about having a conversation with your players when you are running a published adventure. Next question. How as a GM do you handle completing a campaign book with a story customized for your party, but the main plot begins to conflict heavily with the next book? Like you have something that's important in the first book that becomes relevant later on. So I'm guessing like this may be something where there's like say an item or an NPC or something in the first book that you decide to spin into your own way. And then in the next book, it's revealed that item or NPC was actually significant in a totally different way, and now there's a huge conflict.
So one way to do that is to have all of the books available at first, and to skim through the later ones to try to look for connections before you begin. But that's not always possible. And if it isn't possible, then hopefully something that's that important, like the example that you gave, might be signposted in the adventure path itself. But if that still isn't true, then you're gonna have to improvise some changes, and there could be a way around it by introducing a second thing that fulfills the role that the thing that you changed can't fulfill anymore.
And when you do that, you'll want to make sure that it's more distinct from the first thing, so it's not like, this item has these certain properties, but there's also an identical item, or like this other thing. So if you want them to, either make them more distinctive so that they come in different ways and have a different role, or make the fact that they're connected be something that's significant in the plot. Like, does this NPC have a twin who you're going to start finding out about who's caused these problems? Or are these, like, two items that were made together but exist in opposition? And that first item may be able to help you against the second item. So I'd say, like, start dropping... If you're going to have those things have a connection, start dropping hints as soon as you notice that's going to be a problem. Or make them more distinct. And know that even if you're running from a published adventure, like, it's totally okay to just say, you know what? Let's say that there's that NPC is really significant to the plot. You ran book 1, and that NPC or item is really significant to the plot of book 2, but they're not really significant past that point. It's totally okay to drop sections of published adventures and replace them with your own content.
Absolutely. Okay, let's see. So, from Steven Glicker from Roll for Combat asks, I quote, Please answer my question. How do you deal with really annoying players? Like, really annoying. You know, like me! Exclamation mark, question mark, exclamation mark, question mark.
All right. So, so you're a GM and a player is someone you find really annoying.
Now, if you find yourself really annoying, like Steven does, that's actually a whole separate thing.
Yeah.
There's good mental health resources you can go to sort of deal with that, and it's actually a serious problem that we can't really help you on this stream. But if you are finding another player at the table to be really annoying, then
yeah. So, so I'd say that if somebody's bothering you and it is a one-time event, or it's something like, hey, you know, I'm running a game at a convention, I'm not really going to see these people again, then generally just working to go around that behavior. So like if somebody is constantly doing something that's very annoying, and you think that think about why they're doing it. Like, are they doing that for attention? Then make sure that that behavior is not rewarded with a lot of attention. So if their character is constantly doing these kinds of things, then, you know, it's totally okay to be like, hey, you know, it's like, you know, it's cool that you're doing that, but we focused a fair amount of your character. I'm gonna bring the focus onto the other players, or you know, or if their character is being annoying, to have NPCs react as if they find that character annoying.
Yep.
And give more attention and respect to the other.
If the NPCs finding the character annoying seems to be what the player is going for, because that gives them attention, even if it's negative attention. And they're just like, oh, good, then I'm going to have my dwarf go up and burp in their face again. Oh, I had too much ale. Then you can just
have the NPC like roll their eyes or shrug,
roll their eyes and ignore them, and just start talking to the other people and just completely ignore and give the cold shoulder to the dwarf. But then I burp in their face again. Yeah, the NPC ignores you, and so hey, and eventually, if they aren't getting a rise out of the NPCs or disrupting anything, if it's in terms of trying to get attention, that can help. Because negative attention is still attention. Now, there's you can also have someone who's annoying not because their character is doing annoying things, but because the player is doing something annoying, like insisting upon an incorrect ruling on in org play on how some kind of a mechanic works, and trying to bully you into accepting it.
Yeah. And in that case, just giving an answer and not having that answer vary. So it's like, you know, it's like, I understand that's your interpretation, but this is my interpretation. I'm the GM, and we're gonna move on. And if they and if they keep bringing it up, be like, I already said this is my interpretation. We're gonna move on. And if the player continues to be a problem or behaves in a very inappropriate way, you can send them away from your table.
That's right.
So like the player, for example, decides that they are going to try to intimidate you into giving a ruling in their direction, like happened to me once. Sending them away, and I once had a player. I once had a player say like, well, if that's your ruling, then I can't possibly have fun at your table. And then like I just like turned to him and said like, well, I hope you find another way to spend your afternoon that you can enjoy more than. And it's just like, you don't have to put up with that.
And if you're not in an org play situation like Linda was at that time, like, you might be able to find a common ground or a house rule. But if the player is just... If everybody at the table agrees with the ruling except the one player, and the player has a very outlandish ruling, and you're not looking to compromise because there's not really a reasonable compromise, just be firm. Exactly.
Be firm and move on, because if this is something that they're being like very direct about, this could be something that's really irritating them or bothering them that you're ruling in that way, and keeping the focus on that and continuing to talk about it is just going to make them more distressed. Whereas if you move on to something else, particularly like, let's say that they are a player that you have regularly, or somebody that's a friend of yours who is just annoying you at the time, just, you know, say what you're going to say for that, and then move on to something else.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like Steven says, yeah, it's mostly people who don't play well with others or rules arguments.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I guess we went for the two general sides.
Yeah, and I would say that also consider the stakes. Mm-hmm. So like, if this is a case where a character might die based on a particular ruling, or like something really big might happen in the story, then that's worth having more of a conversation with the players to make sure that you're finding some degree of common ground or listening to what they're saying. But if it's just like some random thing that doesn't have that high of stakes, then it's not worth spending that much time on. Or you can be like, we can just, it's like, this is how I'm ruling, and if you are open to talking to this player about their interpretation more, you just don't want to do it now, you can open that door, but don't open that door unless you want to.
Also, you might find a way that you can just make it not matter. For example, in Linda's example that she keeps bringing up, it was the difference between whether or not somebody would have plus 20 on all of their attack rolls or not. That matters. But if it's the player's like, no, I think that my thing that says that if we have fresh ingredients, that gives me a +1 on this nature check to treat wounds, and these ingredients are only 9 months old. That's extremely fresh. You could be like, you know what? I don't really agree, but let's roll and see if you fail by 1 before we continue this long argument of whether a 9-month-old ingredient
exactly.
herb that you picked is actually extremely fresh.
Because it may just not be relevant at all.
Because if you didn't fail by one, then get close to critically succeeding, then we can just move on. That's not always going to work if they're in your group for the long haul, but it seems like what Steven's talking about, like playing an org play where you might not see them again, and so you might not have to worry about it.
Yeah. And if they are someone in your group, having a conversation with them without everyone else there, because you don't want to embarrass the person. If you have to talk, like call them aside to talk to them, you don't want to embarrass them. So, I find that calling for a break in the session and then kind of subtly signaling for them to kind of chat with you a little bit while other people aren't around can make it feel less direct and confrontational. I know that I've had to do that a few times in sessions, like at a game store where, like, whenever people went on break, they went upstairs to browse some things at the game store, and then I could just kind of signal to that person to stay back and be like, hey, it seemed like you were upset by some of the things that were going on here. Can we talk about this?
Yep. And Steven says the biggest issue for him is reining in the New Yorker in him, where he'll go off on them, but probably shouldn't in a con setting. Yeah, generally escalating is not going to help you in almost any setting. Even if you need to be very direct and frank, like Linda is saying, they're doing it in a way that is intentionally trying to avoid an escalation is going to help in most cases. And when you do need to escalate, instead of going off on them, just being firm and saying, I'm sorry, but, like, this is how it is.
Yeah.
It helps because it helps them avoid, escalating right back and getting into an argument.
And it also depends on the very specific behavior. Like, let's say that someone's being annoying because they are backseat playing for new players at the table. Then you can sort of acknowledge it's like, hey, I see that you're really trying to help this person out, and it's like by giving them advice here, but I'm getting the sense that she but it would be good for her to be able to make decisions for her own character and that sort of thing. So you can have those kinds of conversations where you acknowledge sort of assume good intentions and give them an out if they're for what's going on, if that seems reasonable as well.
I've definitely seen a situation like that where then when after I butt in with that, I found out that the new player wanted the experienced player to be backseat playing for them to the extent that they were, and that was fine. And then we moved on.
Yeah.
So let's see. So that's a good question, Steven. What other questions do we have here? Nicole is, as a sort of corollary to this question, players who seem to want to play in co-GM at the same time, if that's how they find ownership, offer them options to participate while not undermining the GM or taking away too much time from others.
Those also seem like players that might be good to give them that sort of like, here's a town where you can do an adventure sometimes type stuff. And having them manage things like the treasure spreadsheets and initiative trackers and other things like that, so that they can feel that they're participating more, but also that takes some of the burden off you as a GM and keeps them busy.
And Joe Jungers reminds me that another possibility when there's a convention or when you're in organized play is that there is usually someone above the GM that things can be escalated to. Although unfortunately, in Joe's story, the escalation was from the problem player, which resulted in Joe being told Joe had to run for the problem player. So Joe had to walk from the slot, but find the other people and then complete the session in the hotel room.
Yeah.
And sometimes that happens.
GMing is never like an obligation that you have to do it. So if you're just like feeling really uncomfortable because someone is bothering you and you're having a lot of trouble with that, like, take care of yourself.
Let's see. So Wizard King's next question is about leveling questions such as character-based XP, where the characters have different XP. We've definitely run campaigns where characters had different XP that varied based on who came for various sessions and who did different things in different subsystems. But we've sort of moved on to with Pathfinder 2nd Edition to just group XP, because lots of people are busy and they miss sessions, and it's just easier if everyone's the same level.
And as the person who would tend to attend like a lot of sessions, I would usually not miss any. I would start to kind of feel bad that I was so far ahead of certain people. So I think it makes a lot of sense to keep everyone together with group XP. And then there's also the question of milestone XP versus XP for accomplishments. I prefer accomplishment-based group XP as my favorite, because then if it's milestone, then it doesn't feel as much like it's relevant how exactly well you did or how well you went through challenges. But I would say that with encounter-based XP, do take a look at how much XP is being awarded by encounters that the PCs bypass in a way other than fighting, because that is still defeating those encounters.
Also, there are ways to get the advantages of some of both. For example, if you use accomplishment-based XP, but you also have signposts in the adventure where they calculate it out for you, then if the PCs do exactly the things that are in the adventure, you don't actually have to add it all up between those two signposts. You can just use the milestone. And then if the PCs missed a certain encounter, you know that they missed that much XP's worth of XP. Or if you added in more and they did more, you know they added in that much XP. So it makes it really easy if you want to do something that is based on the PC's accomplishments, but that doesn't require as much math.
Yeah. And another thing you can do is use those sorts of signposts as signals for when, like, okay, yeah, they actually did just legit not do this whole dungeon, so they're behind, but then that means maybe we'll put in another adventure before we jump into this next part.
Alright, so actually it turns out that Nicole wanted to ask a question about the players who want to seem to try and GM throughout adventures to find ownership while not feeling like giving away the adventure, not giving too much time away from the other players, especially in Society Play one-shots. So the GM Tools player collaboration episode is a great place to start. Obviously, the example of collaboration where the players are building part of the world is not going to work in a Society one-shot. There is a section of the Game Mastery Guide that goes into some of those more like sort of more advanced collaboration among the table situations. It's particularly tricky in Society one-shots because even some of the other non-world building things you might do, like let one of those players like control a certain NPC or certain other toggles are not really allowed in a Society game, because the player might do something that's like way outside the grounds of the adventure if you did that. So it's actually pretty tricky to do it in a pre-published Society game. Do you have any ideas for something?
So I think that the types of things I was talking about with like having them be the one to track initiative, or or like asking them to help set up a map, or things like that.
Maybe have them
Giving
like
some,
write
yeah,
a Pathfinder chronicle
yeah,
of what was going on,
mm-hmm.
and be like, yeah, can you make a like what would the published chronicle be, and how would it highlight the different PCs
Yeah.
that and how did it turn out, and maybe the chronicle is a little different than what actually
Mm-hmm.
happened because the PCs agreed to sort of smooth over some of their own rough spots when they reported
I think it depends also, like, what are they trying to do specifically? Are they
Right.
like, are they trying to run the monster for you? Are they what are they trying to do? Numbet says here is like asking them to look up or check on a rule. That's a great one.
Yep.
So that's a great one to ask to give them find tasks that you can delegate to them.
Mm-hmm.
That don't then impinge upon sort of your ability as a GM to make decisions and to present things.
That makes sense. And Rico and Alftero both gave examples
Mm-hmm.
of different ways that you can give other rewards when the PCs would have earned bonus XP beyond what was expected, while still just using the milestones.
So using milestone leveling, but accomplishment treasure or in-universe perks. So like treasure and allies earned with optional quests, but you don't end up at the wrong levels for those. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if you have pre-gen to make numbers, they can run one of those, absolutely.
Let's see. So, Danny Bing is asking, what is one commonly overlooked mechanic that we feel adds depth and value to a session or campaign?
I would say environmental threats and hazards and terrain.
Oh yeah, that environmental section is one that is so overlooked. It's a fun anecdote. It was, I think, in Pathfinder Society Season 4 or so. So, years back, there was an official campaign coordinator ruling that allowed the GMs to use the environmental rules officially if the adventure like clearly said this is it during a storm, but it didn't say in the adventure the rules for the storm. It's like, listen, you are allowed to use those rules, because they're there, because a lot of people thought that they couldn't even use them or forgot about them. There were some weird things in Pathfinder First Edition environment rules that I literally somehow had never internalized until I was writing the second edition environmental rules. Like, there's a place in the forest where there's a 30% concealment, which I thought it was always 20% or 50%, but there's a 30% one in the forest section of the Pathfinder First environment rules. But that being said, they definitely can add a lot of richness to your feeling that you're in a particular environment if you use them.
So, dealing with things like, how hot and cold and wet is it? What kind of impacts might that have on the gear that the PCs have? And also just generally the sense that, because if you have those kinds of things be more of a presence when the PCs are lower levels, the fact that they overcome them at higher levels can make them feel more on top of things and more awesome. Because of course those types of things aren't necessarily going to be. You're not necessarily going to have like, oh yeah, it's hot outside. That's going to be a problem for you when you're a high level character. But there's still certainly other things that you can have for that in terms of encounters that take place on different levels of elevation or with different areas that can be accessed. Like, hey, maybe you have this encounter that's taking place and there's like these little cave walls that little niches in the side of a cliff face that you can go to duck into for cover. So cover is another example of something that you can do with terrain that can help shake stuff up. Hazards. I really like complex hazards a lot in second edition as a way to just have something that is present. And this is the same for haunts too. Persistent haunts. That in first edition as well. Hazards and traps that are more than just a one-off. Did you detect it? Okay, yes, no, but have some kind of persistent effect. Ways to use skills to change the situation in combat as well fit into that. So maybe there's a lever that you can pull if you're strong enough, a stuck lever that will cause a platform to drop from above that you can drop onto the opponent's head, or use to access an upper area that was previously inaccessible.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just looking for ways that the battlefield and the area as well are dynamic and changing.
Mm-hmm.
And that the environment matters.
Yeah, let me think. Is there any other rule that I think is commonly overlooked? Because I was thinking, like, sometimes people overlook secret checks and just have people roll out in but a lot of people don't overlook secret checks.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they could definitely add to the game by just, like, it helps me when the GM is rolling the secret check secretly too, because I don't have metagame information, so it lets me get into my character with the idea of this is what my character knows. I don't have to set aside, oh, but I know that I rolled a natural one.
Mm-hmm.
So that for me is something that can really, really add to the game, because it just increases the immersion. Let's see.
How can you make a game closer to a survival game when party has, say, a cleric that can provide food with spells? I would say that when you're running a home game in particular, if you want to have a particular feel, then work with the players from the beginning to modify something. So maybe those food preparation spells are not available in your game.
Maybe they're uncommon or rare.
Yeah, maybe they're uncommon or rare in that setting. Maybe maybe they don't provide as much. So for example, maybe you're playing with create water, but if you create water in a desert, it makes like a teaspoon of water, versus if you create water in an area that has a lot of water, then it creates more. So that
maybe
you can't...
in your magical world, the reason there's a desert there is because it's far from a connection to the elemental plane of water. So spells with the water descriptor are weaker.
Yes.
And so that's why there's a desert, because magic is, the ley lines are running through your world. And so that sort of makes sense. It's not just, oh yeah, you're in a desert, so I'm not going to let you use great water. But it's like, no, this is why there's a desert here. Long ago, when there was a connection to the plane of water, there was actually like a lush area, but then it got disconnected. Pathfinder 2nd Edition helps you a little because great water isn't a cantrip, but that is the extent to which it helps you.
Yeah. And I would say, too, you can also work with the players to select characters who don't have those sorts of options. So, like, for example, I had been planning to play a Carrying Crown game that didn't quite go through, but for when I was playing that, I was saying, a character creation, this is in 1st edition, you know, we're not going to, it's like, you know, we're not going to have paladins, and we're not going to have lore oracles, because paladins' immunity to fear it doesn't really fit well with this, and lore oracles' ability to know everything doesn't really fit well with this. So working with the players from the beginning to select character types that are going to work well with the field and just not have some of those options that might be disruptive. If you want to just say, hey, you know, this ability is an issue, then take the spell out, or like, you know, swap or substitute out a character ability that's going to be an issue with something that's equally powerful but doesn't produce.
If you were to run it today in PF1, would you allow the paladins from Horror Adventures to trade out immunity to fear?
Yeah.
Which they intentionally do so that they don't ruin the entire horror environment.
So in that case, like, if there are archetypes or other things that can swap out those options that don't really work for your theme. And I would say for a survival one, it also depends on sort of what you track. So I find that in a lot of cases in a typical Pathfinder game, people aren't going to bother to track things like rations and ammunition and things like that.
But in a
survival game, tracking those sorts of things, and then having things where you're trying to find food, and maybe sometimes some of the food is corrupted and something that you can't eat. Or there was a segment in the a brief segment in Jade Regent where my character was very far separated from the rest of the PCs because of an extremely questionable life decision. Which you can see in our Jade Regent episodes. Right.
You may not want to say Pazuzu's name 3 times in one breath.
You probably don't. But in that case, like, yeah, you know, there were a lot of checks to try to make a shelter in the snow to avoid dying from hypothermia, and she was counting out her arrows and breaking them in half and using them as kindling because there wasn't any wood nearby other than that, and stuff like that. So tracking some of those things, and tracking things to like bulk and being careful with, okay, how much can you actually carry around? Are you going to need to prioritize what treasure you bring with you?
Fortunately, she was a druid who is like one of the best setup classes to survive a cold that is so cold that indoor elements is not even remotely enough.
Yes. I would say for a survival game too, having a lot of interesting challenges that are based on the terrain in the area, dealing with cold, heat, shelter, just these very basic needs.
All right, so let's see. K-Pulv has another question. What are some ways that you could allow the player characters to fail that doesn't involve everyone dying horribly?
So let's assume that we're talking about the case of an encounter first. So is there a reason that the enemies that the PCs are fighting might prefer to capture them alive, to possibly ransom them off, or to decide later what they're going to do with them, and then perhaps one of the PC's allies or another organization goes in and rescues the PCs, but then the PCs owe that group a big favor. So now it's like, oh gosh, not only did we not handle this, so, and then, maybe say like you've got a rival adventuring group to the PCs out there, and the rival adventuring group comes in and gets all the glory by defeating the opponents, and then they rescue the PCs, and then, all the talk of the town the next day is how the rival adventuring group is so awesome, and the PCs just needed to rely upon them.
Yep. Even if the enemy would kill the PCs, there's still possibly some ways to recover. For instance, and I don't want to get too much into
TPKs and other calamities, which is the next one we have.
But if the evil Lich's minions defeat the PCs, maybe the Lich raises them as undead and possesses some kind of talismans that lets the Lich control the PCs, and the PCs are forced to do some of the Lich's bidding while trying to find a way to steal back their soul talismans from the Lich so that they can try to end their undead state and possibly come back to life as not undead. So there's lots of different ways to continue onward. You just sort of have to think about what would be interesting for the story. If it's a big problem, if it's just a little bit of a failure, then it could be something like Elthro was saying with failing forward.
Where it takes, you succeed, but it takes longer or brings you other problems. So the example, you found some food, but you didn't realize it was in the stash of a dangerous creature that followed you to camp. Or, you found your opponents, but it took you long enough that they've had more time to fortify, so they're stronger.
Right.
Or, it's like,
you're fatigued because you got lost in the swamp. That doesn't mean we're gonna just sit here and roll a ton of more dice, or you die in the swamp. You got out, but now you're fatigued because you had to do extra marching to get out of the swamp.
You convince the noble to lend support to your cause, but now there's this other quest that you're gonna need to do for them as payment, or any number of other things like that, where it's like you succeeded, but there's some other consequence. Something later is going to be harder. There's something else you're going to need to do, or you get less treasure because you have to pay this person to help you out, or any number of variety of things.
So let's see. The next question from Adam Generator. When is a good moment to enforce realism versus enforce the rule of cool as a GM? Asked because Adam has seen a lot of times when a player wanted to do something really interesting, but the idea was turned down when the GM said it's not possible to do that.
I would say that for me, realism in a campaign setting is about having it be something that the players can understand and immerse themselves in. And they can understand sort of what are the general expectations and the physics of the world. So,
if you can expect that you can jump 30 feet up, then it's okay to jump 30 feet up.
Yeah, exactly. So if the physics of the game say you can jump 30 feet up, then you should be able to generally jump 30 feet up. But I wouldn't generally let someone just jump 30 feet up because of some idea, but there may be something else that they can do to get up there. Like maybe they can throw a grappling hook to climb up. Or
if they have +2 athletics, and they're like, what would be cool if I jumped 30 feet up, bounced off of this wall 100 more feet to the dragon 130 feet above, and then hit it in the heart. I'm giving that as an example because I do think that the rule of cool is important to consider, but sometimes they're just trying to do something that it's like, but your first level characters probably can't do that. You have to consider how far outside of the actual rules the rule of cool thing they want to do is. Another common one for Pathfinder First Edition, which had a kind of confusing action economy, was I've definitely seen players who were thinking about rule of cool attempting to do like over 2 rounds worth of stuff within 1 round. And for me, if it is close to something that they could do, but they technically can't, but like, oh, this is cool, I can picture it, it fits with the narrative, it's not as immersion breaking as like this 8 strength wizard leaping 130 feet up just because the player narrated it in a cool way, then I think that it might be good to go with the rule of cool if you want that verisimilitude and expectation that Linda's talking about where the players understand. What you could say is, okay, so it looks like this doesn't normally work, but this one time we're going to do it because this is awesome. And that's a very good description. That doesn't mean in general that we're going to do this every time. That's one way you can square the circle when you're like, this is cool, but I don't know how that fits with people's expectations.
And I would say that when you're coming up, if you're not going to say that that specific, if you're not going to have like that one specific thing that you want to have come up, if you're not going to say, hey, this is just an exception, then make sure it's something that you're comfortable having the players do every time and basically just adding that to the rules as an option. So consider what the balance of the thing that you're allowing them to do is.
Yep.
Because you are then writing that into the world as something that can happen.
Yep. You could also ask for an additional check, and if it's really outlandish, be like, well, you're going to need to critically succeed, and the DC is high, so you more or less are going to need a 20 for this. Now, in some cases, it's so outlandish that it is patently clear that even on a 20, wizard is not going to jump 130 feet up. So it really depends on what your group is doing, too. Like, if the way you feel that the genre of the game is and the fantasy in your head is that the 8 strength first level wizard can jump 130 feet up and everyone's like, oh yeah, of course. Or maybe they're not quite, of course, they're like, that's a little weird, but that's pretty cool. Yeah. That's good, let's do it. Then you can do it.
So consistency and fair, I'd say like making sure that you're being consistent and fair with your players. Also, so if you're allowing like some out of the box ideas from one player, make sure that you're also allowing out of the box ideas from other players too.
If and the wizard player tries to do that and has better descriptions, and the fighter it gives this vivid description of it, and then the fighter's like, I jump 130 feet up too. It isn't as like smooth of a talker or good at describing things. It's like, I just want to do that. Yeah. You don't want to be like, well, that didn't sound as cool. So, no, the rules say that you jump up to 2 feet up.
Also, generally watch for like, there's I think a difference between sort of like, here's a cool idea and description that I have, and trying to push at the very edge of power of boundary of the rules. So if you have a player who's constantly trying to get more out of what they can do, like I'm seeing some examples here, like, well, can I do this? Can I spend all this time to trade my animal to do extra things so I can get more things as a free action and stuff like that? Like, you do have to eventually put your foot down.
Glicker was saying people do that in Pathfinder 2nd. I've seen it a lot in Pathfinder 1st too. The people I was talking about who describe a really cool thing, and in some cases, like, you don't have to even ascribe malice to it, right? It's just that, like, some of the people who tried to do things that were over 2 full rounds in Pathfinder 1st Edition what they were asking to do was not that ridiculous. It's just that the combination of things took more than 2 rounds worth of actions because of how you combine standard actions and move actions and so on. So, in some cases, it's just a matter of explaining the action economy. But you have to consider what kind of game you're running. For instance, Stephen Glicker, Roll for Combat, rolls a game that is very strictly by the books. So the rule of cool is not going to be what decides whether you can do something unless it was already in the GM's purview in the books. Let's see. It looks like there are some other opinions about Rule of Cool, or Avondale about establishing the boundaries early on. Adam Generator also sees people trying to push the envelope on the action economy. I've seen that in almost every game, whether it's intentional or not.
And I think that when you have that sort of thing come up, um, if you can think of a way that they can get most of what they were trying to do and propose that, then that can be really helpful. Like if the player is trying to do 4 actions worth of stuff, you can try to think about, okay, what's the main thrust of what they're trying to do. Let them know, like, hey, well, this is 4 actions, but you could do this thing and this thing and this thing.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see. Ogrex says, big thing I'm having trouble with as a GM is my players successfully sneak up on a group of enemies and don't get free actions against the enemies because of initiative. What do? So, in general, Ogrex, if your players are sneaking up on the enemies and they've rolled that stealth check and it's very high, you might want to consider that the stealth check they're rolling to sneak up on the enemies is also their initiative roll.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that might mean one enemy in the group of enemies rolls a really high perception and gets to go amidst that PC ambush because that one was with it. But if you use the successful stealth checks as the initiative roll as well, then you know that the PCs have a greater than 50% chance essentially of going before any given opponent with that ambush because well, they beat their perception DC. So
yeah. So they need to roll above a 10 at the very least.
Yeah, I guess it's not greater because of the fact that that enemies. It's not guaranteed to be greater because of the fact that enemies win on a tie, but that would require the outlandishly unlikely event that all of the PCs rolled exactly the DC. I suppose if you have, it could be trickier, and you'll have to roll separately for sure if you're using quiet allies, because in that case, I mean, I guess if the PCs want to use an initiative that all uses the worst person in the party's stealth roll,
as opposed to rolling separately, they
because you work that out. But you can do that, and then that will give you the same feel because if they failed their stealth and were noticed, then it really makes sense that they're not going.
Another thing is reactions, because the GM has discretion on whether or not people can use their reactions before they've gone. So So none of the opponents who are being ambushed can use their reactions, but all of the PCs can use their reactions because they knew this was going to happen. And the PCs can have a chance to position themselves a lot more favorably.
That's right. Yes. Positioning is important. Remember, initiative is rolled on the first round that anybody who did something would have been, basically when you do something that the other side would obviously react to, such as casting a spell, attacking with your sword or your bow or something like that, initiative should have been rolled before you did that. But that means that you can sneak into exactly whatever. If you succeed on the stealth check, even if you're not using that for the initiative roll, you can sneak into whatever position you want because all of those are things that you were still hiding. The enemies would not have seen that.
Yes.
Initiative is not rolled until the round where someone is trying to do something that would have been obvious to the other side. So you get to set up the battle on your terms. You get to have your reactions. Linda's right. It does explicitly say that you get reactions on your turn, but the GM's discretion, if you knew what was coming up, you might get your reactions before your first turn, which is can be a pretty big advantage. And so there are a lot of ways to handle it that do not require the sort of really devastating and pretty unfair especially when it happens in the other direction situation where somebody's got another round to go before the PCs go, or just a bunch of extra actions that come, and they probably win initiative because their stealth was good to double down.
Yeah,
on
certainly for both of us, part of the verisimilitude of the world is that the rules impact the PCs and their opponents in the same way.
Yeah, it's really it's more fair to make sure that it works the same way between the PCs and the NPCs, whatever you're going to do.
So if I'm going to make a ruling for the PCs, then that's also going to apply to the NPCs, so I don't want to let the PCs do something I wouldn't want the NPCs to be able to do. Alrighty.
Let's see.
People are talking about Follow the Expert.
Oh, Follow the Expert is so
yes.
good. It's so
really
good. our episode that was like PF2 and the Anatomy of a Heist, and then also again War for the Crown where we redid it.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way you guys would have been able to
We
do your
definitely need to
plan
follow the
to
expert.
impersonate guards and then sneak into a fortress without following the expert. Not after the archer fighter decided that even though you guys were spies, he was not going to take any charisma or intelligence based skills. It was hard for him not to have any.
Let's see. Next question. Not a GM question, but is there a story behind why I say yep?
Yep.
I don't know why I say yes that way on this. Do I do that other than on this stream?
Yep.
I do. Okay. It's a quirk, I guess.
Is it from Avatar? Yip
No.
Yip Appa?
When did I start doing this?
I don't know. Maybe you always have.
I guess I'll have to ask my family.
Yeah, you can ask your family. Is that just one of the things that people in your family sometimes say?
No, I can't think of anyone else. It's just, I guess I just do that.
Oh, Rico the Bolt says, yep, from Land Before Time.
I didn't really watch Land Before Time that much, though. I mean, I guess it's possible.
Like Ducky, yep.
Yeah, I know Ducky says that, but like, I don't remember a time when I was like, Ducky does that and it's cool.
Asking the hard questions here. We were able to answer all these like big showstopper problems, but why Linda says yep, we couldn't answer. Let's see. Oh yeah, looking back this way enough times, have you shown the Plague Doctor bat to everybody yet?
So this wasn't this one of the ones that Eleanor recommended to us?
Yes, it was.
So this is a no soy bat. It's got its own little felt hat and a Plague Doctor mask
that you could take off, and it is a bat underneath there.
Detachable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really cool. This is my new friend.
It's the Plague Doctor no soy bat. Linda was like thinking that she already had a lot of bats, but she also really likes no soy, and so when it was the bat that was also a no soy,
I was like, yeah, I have to buy this.
Yep.
You'll see. There'll be another plushie on the show in a few weeks. It's a handmade plushie. It's one of the ones from that Eleanor has been proposing because Risky gave us a big contribution, and asked us to buy something fun with it. So we're gonna have another cactus plushie on here soon, courtesy of Risky.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Eleanor always posts the best stuff. All right, so let's see.
Well, this has like a little scarf too. This is just the cutest thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Adam Generator is talking about liking the initiative system. Because in PF1, a first level rogue with +4 dex and improved initiative would statistically almost always go before 20th level cleric. Even though the gods are probably like whispering to that cleric. Yeah, that absolutely.
Welcome. The stream in general is about Pathfinder related stuff. We do a lot of advice for GMs and players. We do workshops where we build things collaboratively. We do recaps of some of our sessions.
We talk about our APs and the way we adjusted them or modified them. On Tuesday, we're going to do our first actual play that we've ever done as sort of a beta to let people just sort of tell us how it goes and see if it actually works out. And also there are plushies like the Plague Doctor bat. So basically you can vote on the episodes using the in-stream polling option, and we will throw whatever episode people want. Right now the polls are for Linda's Skull and Shackles Part 8, which is one of the adventure paths she's run. My Rise of the Rune Lords Part 2. Part 1 is still on Twitch on View on Demand. Where in Part 1, I killed 5 characters already. It's Pathfinder Pathfinder First Edition, where everyone dies all the time.
So deadly. So that link I just threw in tiny.cc/arcademark is our Discord, and you're certainly welcome to join us over there. And I noticed you said you know Mark. So hi, I'm Linda, and I am the Organized Play Managing Developer, which means that I coordinate I coordinate the production of the Pathfinder, Starfinder, and Pathfinder Adventure Card Society scenarios.
That's right. And, yeah, the other ones that are on the poll for today are Build a Monster Workshop 5, the final Build a Monster Workshop, which is not the last Build a Monster Workshop.
It's just part of our naming convention.
The Build a Monster Workshops are named after Star Trek movies.
Trippy, thanks for gifting Yellow a sub.
I got the XP for that one. And then we've got GM Tools Tiny and Massive Creatures for advice and ideas about super ridiculously big creatures and really, really small ones and how to use them in game.
Yeah, Numbot was super generous earlier. Numbot and Elf both gave a huge number of people subs. Just to make sure that, like, because it was definitely sub-only chat earlier today where everybody who wasn't subbed yet got a sub.
Alright, so let's see. And OX asking, are we running in-person games now?
Nope.
We are not running stuff that's in person. We're doing everything virtually, but I mean, we'll run it with ourselves.
Yeah.
OX may be asking if we're doing actual plays now on the stream, which we are doing a beta of the very first attempt to do one on Tuesday with just the two of us in a short 1 hour bounty or something, just to see if the format works and if people like it. Because people have asked for it for a while and we weren't sure, but you know, we might as well try it and see how it goes.
Have we tried Foundry yet? I have not tried Foundry. I have heard amazing things about it.
So let's
for this, since we're just getting started, I'm guessing we'll probably use Theater of the Mind, since that's actually how we primarily do our games.
And I hear Theater of the Mind works well for streaming. In any case.
But I definitely want to give Foundry a try.
So let's see. The next question after that is, what are some magical animals that could make an interesting Find the MacGuffin creature? So, if we're going through the entire corpus of Pathfinder in both editions, I know the Serenitis from Pathfinder 1st Edition, or the Golden Hind from the Golden Hind of Artemis, was definitely very much this monster is maybe not that hard to, like, win, I mean, it's not that dangerous to attack you, but it's really hard to catch the thing. Because it was based off of Heracles' labor, where he had to catch it, and it was ridiculous, and he eventually was able to ambush it and grab it, and that was the only way he even got rid of it. The Serenitis is a level 7 creature in PF1 that has 180-foot speed, and when a creature makes a range or melee attack against it, targets it with an ability or includes it in the area of effect of an ability, it can move up to half its speed as if having ready in action to move. Moving at all foils range and melee attack. Moving out of an area of effect avoids the area ability. Moving out of the range of a targeted effect avoids the targeted ability. And triggers lightning stance, but not if she's unaware of the attacker ability or rendered immobile or bears a rider. So, that basically is very much like a puzzle creature that's based off the myth of it being a puzzle creature.
There's also creatures like sea serpents that are like elusive sea serpents
super
that
elusive.
you have to try to find, and they hide a lot. But if you want to, you could also take things like those, like that elusive idea, and graft them onto some other creature. If you want to say, like, oh yeah, you know, this is the elusive griffin.
The elusive griffin has the sea serpent's elusive ability.
Yes.
With a DC based on the level of the griffin. And you could create your own, if you wanted to do like a sort of like a cryptid hunting campaign, you could just, where people are finding these very elusive versions of each type of creature, you could create an elusive template that was based off of the sea serpent and just put it onto different creatures.
Yeah.
For sure. Let's see. Alftro has a question about Inventor. Inventor is common items only.
This was I think a previous question that I saw before there about crafting.
Wait, what is it? I don't know. I think
yeah, here at Evandale. Aside from the adventure feat, how do you recommend just scale?
Oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
How do you recommend handling lower level crafter characters who have new ideas for something that is just basically not in the game right now? So the inventor feat lets you pick up common formulas that are already in the game, but that the PC doesn't have. They just invent it on their own. Now, if the player wants to invent an uncommon or rare thing, you have to consider, like, well, the reason this is rare is because only certain people had it. It was supposed to be an adventure reward normally, and so just saying, oh well, you can invent it anyway, is could be unsatisfying. But for your group, maybe it wouldn't be.
Or you could have them do a quest.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So, normally the way that you get a rare option, and maybe in this case, in Avondale's example, an option they entirely made up on their own, is you go on a quest for it. So maybe the idea is, okay, your inventor wants to invent this brand new item that's never been seen before, and you look at it and it's like, this is reasonable, it's brand new, but maybe they need to go on a quest to make the prototype. It's like, okay, it's possible that later versions of this won't require this, but to make the first one work, you're going to need to get this very special horn from a Serenitis that we did from the previous question. And so you can wind up with a quest to help them do that, or a research subsystem where they go into a library and you build an adventure around researching and make sure it's a fun library.
Or like this is an item that has a lot of electrical power in it, and so they need to go to the plane of air to get like some sort of they need to go to the plane of air to get like solidified lightning and then put that into it. So the idea that they have to get something that is very purely and essentially that item's function to get that first prototype to work, so that they can understand and study it before they can figure out what are the most important pieces that are needed to make this work in the long run.
Because normally you'd give a rare item for quests anyway, or an uncommon item for pursuit of the PCs had of something that they wanted. So you can just turn those around if the PC is the one creating it, and the story is the PC creates it, but in essence, you've been given the same opportunity for story beats and for enriching the game that you would have had if they found it. Maybe even more so because they can feel ownership of it.
This makes me think of like a campaign where the PCs are all inventors who are trying to go towards some ultimate goal. Like maybe they want to build like a giant robot or something like that, and in order to make that vision a reality, they have to have like these inventions along the way, each of which triggers its own quest.
All right, let's see.
How do you even get to the positive energy play to destroy an artifact? Extremely low-level party, but they want a certain artifact gone now. Well, I think that, in some cases, the artifact destruction conditions are as difficult as they are, so that a low-level party can't just go destroy them. But they may be able to go on quest to find some other method, to research and find some other method that's possible, that's really specific and complicated and weird, that will let them do that.
Or they might be able to find a weird ritual that would theoretically bring them to the positive energy plane, but that might be a little bit unreliable. They might be able to bargain with a creature, like bargain with a diva who can survive the positive energy plane to bring the artifact to that plane, using the diva's angelic messenger ability. So there are a few possibilities you can come up with just in terms of advancing the story, again, by making something that the PCs have to negotiate or find or
in my Kingmaker campaign, I had introduced an evil artifact that could only be destroyed if a powerful good outsider devoured it and died in the process.
And so, because of that fact, we had the Priest of Erastal summon the Grim White Stag, the Herald of Erastal, which had an ability that specifically allows it to die and create food for a bunch of people and then come back to life. So that therefore nobody actually really died, and the artifact was destroyed.
Yes. So there can certainly be creative ways to address some of these destruction conditions.
Whether can get there, I can never get the Movanic and the Monadic Diva apart.
Loopholes indeed, yeah.
One of the two types of divas, specifically, here it is, the Movenic. I got it right this time. Movenic divas specifically go to the positive and negative energy planes. In their description, they also spend time patrolling the positive energy plane and negative energy plane, seeking to contain significant threats to life. They have the aura of vitality. Allies in the Movenic Diva's aura gain a +1 status bonus to all saving throws, resistance 10 to positive and negative damage, unharmed by the effects of planes' positive and negative traits. Animals in the aura also get a benefit.
Said, an artifact that can only be destroyed by eating it and dying. Classic Tuesday night at Golden Corral. Oh man, I haven't been into a Golden Corral since like high school field trips.
So yeah, a Movenic Diva is a good choice for the positive energy plane, just because of their aura vitality.
Let's see. They all have a yellow PCs. All have a Dreamstone, an uncommon item where you only need 2 hours to fully rest once per day. What are some fun role playing and mechanical things they can do if they all have Dreamstones? Well, I mean, the fact that you don't need to sleep nearly as much makes it a lot more possible to have adventures during the hours of the day where people are usually asleep. So, are they a group that wants to do, say, heists or other operations that we're gonna work a lot better in the middle of the night? Maybe they can, maybe they can see a lot more of the world that is generally active at night.
Yeah, they're gonna be a lot harder to ambush, and they're gonna have a huge variety in sorts of different times and flexibility, but
they could sleep in the middle of the day.
Ultimately, even if you only need 2 hours of sleep to rest, unless the item also does this, there's a certain amount of hours of like physical and mental energy that you could provide to tasks before you're eventually going to get drained of that. Now, it's possible the Dreamstone gives them more of that, in which case they can do even more sort of productive tasks during the day as well.
It's interesting with and I've had this happen not even just with Rings of Sustenance and other things in my games where you have PCs who are like, well, you know, I'm going to be constantly working and being productive for all hours of the day. So there can be interesting dynamics that happen with NPCs. As NPCs start to respond to the fact that the PCs live that way. You could have NPCs be like concerned for the mental health of the PCs and being like, wow, you know, did they ever stop? Or it's like, are you okay? These kinds of things. So that it's sort of, I find that NPCs are a great way to, without telling the players, you can't do this thing that doesn't make sense that a healthy human being would do. But having NPCs respond in a way that's like, hey, you know, that's and then the PCs might, you know, they can just roll with it and be like, oh yeah, you know, I don't need to sleep, I'm fine. But
it's usually considered to be a sign of a serious problem with anxiety or depression if there's a period of increased productivity to that regard.
Yes.
All right. So another thing you could do, also, if you're talking about not just what can they do because of the fact that they don't need to rest as much, but it's like what could happen if they all have something called a Dreamstone. There could be a situation where there's resonance between the PC's Dreamstones and some kind of like weird menhir that's around them. I'm thinking of like the weird menhir in one of the early books of the Wheel of Time that sends people into the dream world, or like a ley line, and then they think they wake up and they're all in the dreamland.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Or that they have, or I was thinking something along those lines, that if all of their sleep is being condensed into the short period of time and they're having more vivid dreams, does that perhaps make them more, or is there going to be like a night hag or something that notices this and comes in? Are they going to be starting to deal with dream creatures that are infiltrating in on their waking world?
Are they going to have to make like deals with Baku to help guard them from these creatures?
And some of these things will be beneficial and some of these things will be detrimental because maybe they've sort of peeled back a veil on some aspects of the world that most people don't normally see.
Alright, let's see. So Adam Generator asks, how is a good way to implement the relic system from the Game Mastery Guide? Loves the idea of that kind of items, but it's hard to justify why they improve. So, when you... I'm going to tease that out into two questions, because implementing it methodically versus... it seems like the question is mostly about thematically. So methodically, there's really you should probably give relics to everybody, and they could either be a found relic or a relic that is part of the PC's backstory. Thematically, the reason why the relics improve should be tied to your adventure in some way. For example, if the sword is like the master swordswoman's like grandfather's sword, and like her connection with her grandfather and like her spirit of her grandfather watching over her and just her connection to this blade can be part of what makes it improve, and you can pick aspects that make sense for that. Whereas the wizard who maybe didn't have an item to begin with, but just you found this weird ring with like that was connected to magical fire, it might be that that ring is just slowly revealing its true power to the wizard as the wizard proves himself worthy that it's actually a ring that once belonged to Atreya, the lambent prince, the elemental lord of fire, and is going to try to convince this PC to release Atreya from being imprisoned.
Oh, that's funny. I know you haven't scrolled down far enough to see this, but like literally the next comment after where you were, after talking about changing a magic item in the AP EGMs to be influenced by a player character's grandfather.
Oh, okay. I had not seen that yet.
So yeah, the spirits of lost ancestors is a really cool idea. Or like some kind of supernatural force that has a greater tie to the PCs over time, or sort of there could be a sense that the PC's own vital energy or essence in some way is growing stronger as they get to higher levels and interacting with the item. Or it also may be like you have a crafter in the group, and the crafter is the one who's unlocking this greater potential within the item as their own skill as a crafter improves.
Yep. Another thing you could do, even if the PCs don't want to all start with a relic that's tied to their backstory, is show the relic seeds to the PCs and say to them, pick, or not the seeds, sorry, the aspects that each relic has two of, and say, pick one of these that is like a special aspect of your character. Is shadow a special thing of your character? Is fire? And the player can pick that aspect, and then the way that manifests is that's one of the aspects that they're going to lend to their relic. Even if it's an item they find later on. And it'd be like, yeah. And you write it into their backstory. Let's say it's shadow. It's like, you know, I've always turned my back on Zon Kuthan, but in Nidal they always said that my family was blessed by the Midnight Lord, and the shadows kind of twist and turn around me. And it's like, okay, sure. How does that manifest? Well, the player could take, like, some of those ancestry feats from Lost Omen's character's guide, but even if you don't, the way that manifests is shadow aspects on the relic, and that's a manifestation of that backstory. That backstory.
So
beat.
is that
so
like the one relic upgrades based on what all the PCs do? Because now you have me thinking about like a relic that interacts a little bit differently with each PC depending on who's holding it.
Normally the relics are for that PC, so you could be like, well, you found the Sky Sword, which is normally would be an air relic, and we put it on that character, and it's an air shadow relic, because normally they have two aspects. And so you could do that where there's a story beat for the character that represents, and it's like the shadow is supercharging the Sky Sword, and now it's becoming more powerful and gaining shadow and air abilities. So there are ways you can do it. You just work together with the players to come up with an explanation for why it's powering up, or maybe it's just an item. Relics in the War for the Crown adventure path, which are similar in that they scale up. The idea with them is they were once very powerful items of old Taldor, but Taldor is an incredibly old empire, that really unrealistically old empire, even. And so over the millennia, some of the items from the past have become weaker with disuse. But by being used in triumphs, it restores them to their former glory, and that allows them to regain some of their power. So there's a lot of stories you can tell about the different relics. And yeah, Linda's idea definitely works too, where you could pass the relic around and it gets different combos, sort of like dual attacks from video games or things like that. It's like, well, oh yeah, I like that thing that we can give to the character with the fire aspect with the Sky Sword that does this like raging inferno that spreads throughout the air.
But
we should switch it onto them.
switch it onto that character. But then later on, when you're fighting like the swarm of fire elementals, then you probably want to put it on.
I'll put on the shadow character and do a shadow warp stab or something like that. So you can definitely tie it in like that. Let's see. Did we have?
Get that antipode rolling. Yep, Chrono Trigger,
antipode,
totally.
Chrono Trigger. All right.
Looks like we've reached
I
the
think
bottom
we
of the
did
questions
it.
for
We
now.
answered all the questions.
Yay!
Okay.
But still, I felt like there were a lot of questions throughout here,
Oh,
so
yeah,
I think it's worth putting this episode topic on the poll again in the future.
Yeah, this was definitely a good topic. Oh, wait. What do we look like? A waiter? Well, that's Final Fantasy VI.
I know.
Since we did Chrono Trigger.
I know. That was round one. That was the
surprise
surprise round. No, Stephen. We've been here for almost 2 hours now.
It was more than a surprise round.
Round 2 shall be in a separate episode.
That's right. So let's say goodbye to YouTube before we do our last Twitch stuff. Bye, YouTube. See you next time.